What is up, and welcome to a special Saturday morning edition of Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. As always, I am your host, Brandon Silvers, talking NFL Divisional Round playoff matchups. I know what you're thinking, Brandon. You normally leave making NFL picks to your dog Kobe on his own show, Beyond the Bark, which you can find here on TikTok and in the YouTube short section. And you would be correct. He's very good at it. But I've decided to dive a little bit deeper into his analysis while also offering up my own for the first time in Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers history. This has nothing to do with an interview guest standing me up on a Friday evening on a very busy weekend when I'm celebrating my grandmother's 82nd birthday. I have no other day to do anything, record anything, write anything, so it left me scrambling for content. Has nothing to do with that whatsoever, despite what all the rumors are. I will say, again, completely unrelated, that I do have some upcoming guests who are more responsible, more familiar. And I'm very excited about that, but that's unrelated to anything that I'm doing here tonight, this evening, when I should be focused on my grandmother's birthday. So let's get into the picks. Again, do not use any of this information to place bets with any type of currency, particularly money. These are my thoughts and my dog's thoughts, just for fun so that you can enjoy this weekend's games. Okay, first game is at 4:30 Eastern Time Saturday. The Houston Texans, fresh off a blowout wildcard win against the Cleveland Browns. They've had a hell of a season led by rookie quarterback C.J. Stroud and first-year head coach DeMeco Ryans. They are headed to Baltimore to take on the Ravens, who had a bye last week thanks to their 13-4 regular season record. They're led by Lamar Jackson. Their head coach is the more normal Harbaugh brother, John. Let's see what Kobe thinks. All right, as you can see, a lot of thought put into this, but he ends up going with the Ravens, who are favored by 9.5. Is he a good boy or a bad dog? I'm going good boy here. Look, this Texans season has been unreal. I'm a Panthers fan, so it's been demoralizing to see what CJ Stroud is doing, knowing that we could have drafted him, but it's also awesome. He's put himself not only at the top of Rookie of the Year conversations, but also in MVP conversations as well. He certainly looked like a vet last week, going 16 for 21 for 274 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first career playoff game. Clearly a home run pick that set them up to have an excellent future, along with the hire of DeMeco Ryans. Some important DeMeco Ryans trivia: he's from Bessemer, Alabama, which also gave us the most impressive athlete we've seen in Bo Jackson and the most hilarious athlete we've seen in Jameis Winston. The Texans won't be eating any W's this week, but that has less to do with them and more to do with the Ravens. Baltimore is stacked, they're at home, and they've been beating the hell out of good teams all season long. As long as I've been alive, the Ravens' identity has been on the defensive side of the ball. Nothing is different there, as they led the league in fewest points allowed, giving up just 16.5 a game. They have playmakers at each level, including safety Kyle Hamilton, who was first-team All-Pro this year, just his second in the league. They also have former Texan and, more importantly, former South Carolina Gamecock Jadeveon Clowney, who actually tied his career high in sacks this season with 9.5, and another first-team All-Pro in Roquan Smith at linebacker. It feels like all he does is make All-Pro teams. Obviously, the man who makes things happen on offense is Lamar Jackson. We're at a point in Lamar Jackson's career where if you can't acknowledge that he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, then it's just never going to happen, so we should ignore you. He's putting together one of the better careers too. Looks like he's on his way to his second MVP. And obviously the big missing piece is a Super Bowl. And I get why we want quarterbacks to win a Super Bowl. But can we talk about how silly it is to weigh that heavily when we're talking about who's great and who isn't? Not only are there plenty of terrible quarterbacks who have won Super Bowls, Trent Dilfer, but it's really hard to make enough of a difference as a single player in a football game when you're only playing half the game. There are just so many variables. It's also weird to penalize him for his ability to run. Now, we know what they're really saying when they say they like quarterbacks to be more quarterbacky, but let's humor them for a second. First of all, Lamar can throw the ball, and he can throw it well. The stats and my eyeballs have confirmed that ever since he was in college. And he had a little bit of a downward trend in his passing, but they got him some more weapons to throw to this year, and what do you know, he's back to being a fantastic passer. And his running makes him a better passer because it gives you another thing to worry about him doing. This is good. He's versatile. That's a great thing in sports. Imagine if we got mad at a baseball player for being able to hit for average and power, or a basketball player for being able to shoot and handle the ball. Makes no sense. But a quarterback who can run, well, he stinks. Think about how much better Peyton Manning would have been as a quarterback if he could have lugged that forehead of his around. It's silly to pretend that being able to do more things well is bad, and his ability to do this is going to carry him and the Ravens past the Texans this week, since I don't know how you stop him, and I don't think they can do enough against the Ravens defense to make up for that. A great season for Houston and a bright future ahead, but Kobe nailed this one. Moving on, the next game is Saturday night at 8:15 Eastern Time. The Green Bay Packers beat the hell out of America's team last week, a game Kobe picked correctly, by the way. They head to California to take on the San Francisco 49ers, who had a bye week last week. I cannot think of this matchup and not think of that playoff game where Terrell Owens caught the game-winning touchdown pass with a couple seconds left, and he cried on the field because he's been dropping passes all game. Jerry Rice actually fumbled on that last drive, and the refs missed it, so Green Bay got screwed. Did this motivate Brett Favre to steal from the state of Mississippi, where both he and Jerry were from? No, he did it because he's an asshole, but it's fun to think about. That game was played 25 years ago, in case you wanted to feel really old. That is 175 years in dog years, so let's see Kobe's pick. And again, he's rocking with the Packers in another upset. Dogs are very much pack animals, so I imagine he's making some sort of pack-packer connection. But is he a good boy or a bad dog? Unfortunately, I'm going bad dog here. Now, I want to acknowledge that Jordan Love had a sneaky great year in his first season as starter, throwing for 4,100 yards, 32 touchdowns, and just 11 interceptions. He looks very much like the third straight ridiculously talented quarterback the Packers have gotten in a row. They haven't had a bad starting quarterback since 1991. I don't know how they do it, especially when the Bears have never had a good one. The only real concern I have about Jordan Love is when we're going to find out he's an asshole. It's going to be hard to top Favre's dick pics and welfare fraud and Aaron Rodgers being friends with Pat McAfee, but you know it's coming. It's just some sort of deal with the devil the Packers fans have signed to get these great quarterbacks. I'd also like to point out that Love put up these numbers with basically the same receiving core Rodgers had last season and complained that he couldn't do anything with. With all that said, this team isn't quite there yet. They're a 9.5-point underdog, and for good reason. The main one being that they're going up against an absolute wagon of a team. Most of the season has been spent trying to figure out if Brock Purdy is a great quarterback. However, I really don't think that matters. He doesn't necessarily have to be great so much as he has to avoid making some of those ridiculous turnovers he makes. He's Favre-like in that sense. There's literally a YouTube video called The Craziest Turnover Highlight Reel in College Football History, and it's all Brock Purdy turnovers. He hasn't changed. He's not going to. He merely has to do it when it matters the least and not do it a lot. If he can manage to do that, then he's surrounded with some of the best playmakers in the league in one of the best offensive systems in the league. Christian McCaffrey is Lamar Jackson's top competition for MVP. He led the league in rushing yards, nearly 300 more than Derrick Henry's second place total, and he didn't play all 17 games. He scored 14 rushing touchdowns and another 7 receiving. He's like a modern-day Marshall Faulk. Imagine if the Panthers kept him and drafted C.J. Stroud. Now, they probably would have found a way to screw it up, but it's nice to dream. Brandon Ayuk had over 1,300 yards receiving, and George Kittle led all tight ends with 1,020 yards receiving. For as awful as Iowa is at offensive football, they churn out elite tight ends like it's nothing. And then there's former Gamecock Deebo Samuel, who does a little bit of everything, and most of that little bit of everything leads to a big play. They also have fullback Kyle Juszczyk, who was first-team All-Pro, along with McCaffrey, Kittle, and left tackle Trent Williams. No clue how you would even begin to evaluate a fullback in today's NFL, and I only brought him up because his wife is blowing up on social media for making a jacket for Taylor Swift. Defensively, they were third in fewest points allowed, and they led the league in interceptions. Something to look out for on that end of the ball is defensive end Nick Bosa going up against a black quarterback, so please pray for Jordan Love. Just too much firepower on both ends of the ball for San Francisco and not enough for the Packers is what this comes down to. This one is a late start, but you won't have to stay up for the whole thing. Moving on to Sunday's first game at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers put the Eagles out of their misery last week. They're headed to the Dome in Detroit to take on the Lions, who survived against the Rams in the wild card. What's Kobe going to do? Good Lord, he is picking the Bucs. Good boy or bad dog? Well, I'm going bad dog here. Let's discuss. Now, I will say the Bucs looked great the second half of the season. However, I think that was mostly because they were playing in a very weak NFC South. You have to play who's on the schedule, so it's not their fault, but a good team is on the schedule this week. Baker Mayfield had a good season, a great season compared to how he's looked so far in his career, but do you trust him? I just can't, and I feel like the only thing I need to say to justify that feeling is that he's Baker Mayfield. I do want to talk about one of the most underrated wide receivers in NFL history, Mike Evans, an NFL record for most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons to start a career with 10. That means you have to be good out the gate and be good for a long time, and he's both. If he were somewhere else, we'd probably talk about him more, and he's also pretty laid back for a wide receiver, but dude balls out every year. He had 13 touchdowns to go with his 1,255 yards receiving this year. They also have receiver Chris Godwin, who is also underrated and had a 1,000-yard season himself. Not too many receiver combos better than this one, which makes Baker's life easy. It's just hard to get super excited about him. You can't help but get excited about the Lions, though, because Dan Campbell's so caffeinated, it's contagious. He claims to drink 1,100 milligrams of caffeine every morning. That's the equivalent of 10 Red Bulls. Do not do this. Speaking of quarterbacks I don't really trust, they have Jared Goff. I look at his numbers and they're great, second in the league in passing, and he's cut down on those turnovers since he got to Detroit. He just doesn't feel like he's putting up those numbers when you watch him. Kind of gives me the same feeling that Matt Stafford did when he was here, where you're looking at the stats trying to figure out when the hell did all that happen. But credit where credit is due, because like I said, he used to be an interception machine. Now he's not. And if you can hold onto the ball, you can win. I mentioned the Bucs have a pretty good 1-2 punch at receiver, while the Lions have one at running back with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. They scored 23 touchdowns on the ground and combined for nearly 2,000 yards rushing. We just talked about Iowa tight ends. Well, here's another one in rookie Sam Laporta. Great year, but he is questionable for this game with an injury, and I do think they can look very different if he doesn't play or if he plays and isn't effective. Their main receiver is Amon-Ra St. Brown, who finished third in the league with 1,515 yards in just 16 games. His name means sun god, and his dad added the Saint to their last name because it sounded neat. The perfect wide receiver origin story. A lot of offensive firepower here. Now, Campbell feels like a defensive coach, but they put up points. And they need to, because their defense is going to give up a few. Aiden Hutchinson is every bit of the elite pass rusher they thought he'd be, but if the Bucs can keep him off Baker, they're going to be able to put up some points. I just don't think they can score quite enough to pull off the upset. Whether or not my Goff skepticism is justified, the Lions can just do too much on that side of the ball. Kobe's wrong, I'm right. Final game of the weekend, Sunday at 6:30 Eastern Time, is the Buffalo Bills at home taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. I feel like these two teams have played 47 times the past 5 years. Anyways, this one is in Buffalo and it's going to be cold, but both of these teams can handle the cold. Let's see what Kobe is thinking. Going with the Chiefs, good boy or bad dog? This is tough. Buffalo is favored by just 2.5. I'm going good boy. It was negative 300 million degrees last week in Kansas City, and they beat the Dolphins by throwing the ball. I have no idea how Patrick Mahomes could do that. His helmet didn't even survive those temps, but damn it, he did it. He wasn't quite as spectacular this season as he's been other years. He had that really whiny thing he did when Kadarius Toney was clearly offsides and Mahomes whined about the refs instead of Toney being a jackass. But he's still Patrick Mahomes. I watched that Netflix QB series, so I'm clearly an expert, and this dude only cares about being an awesome quarterback. I don't know if I want to hang out with him, but I can't say I want to bet against him either. The offense has certainly been a concern. Kadarius Toney doesn't know the rules or how to catch. Travis Kelce looks like he may have lost a step to the point that we're starting to blame Taylor Swift for some reason. You cannot name any of their wide receivers. Maybe Eric Bieniemy actually is a great offensive coordinator. But on the defensive side of the ball, they just don't give up points. Second fewest points allowed in the NFL this year. They can win like this. Remember, Andy Reid was winning with an Alex Smith-led offense that leaned heavily on its defense too. Now they'll have their work cut out for them with Buffalo. The Bills are awesome at home, and they also have a defense that doesn't give up points, and their offense has been better than Kansas City's this year. But I'm just going to have to see it to believe it. They fell apart last season against the Bengals in the playoffs, and the 2 years before that both ended against the Chiefs. Josh Allen is one of the most physically gifted quarterbacks in the league, a guy who can throw it a mile, and he's built like a tank, and he can run it. He ran for a hilarious for a quarterback 15 touchdowns. But as good as he's been, he's also had some hiccups this year. Touchdown passes went down. He threw a career high in picks, and they cannot afford to give away possessions to this Kansas City team, but I think he will, and I think that's what's going to cost him. So there you go. I agree with two of Kobe's picks, and I disagree with two. We'll see who's right. This has been a special NFL playoff episode of Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. Thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing. I will not see you Monday, but I will catch you later.